I mean, after Giannis, they have a bunch of guys in the $25 to $10 million salary range. Everyone from, again, Myles Turner, a guy they just signed, and if they would move on from Giannis, probably don't have much use for. And well, we have a very storied history between him and the Lakers, going back 4 or 5 years now at this point, an often mentioned trade target from their team during his days with the Indiana Pacers, all the way back to the Russell Westbrook era. Even before that point, reports said that they tried to trade for him and even had him at the top of their trade list at one point. So could that once again be an option? Myles Turner, now at 29 years old and freshly signing a new contract with the Milwaukee Bucks, signing a 4-year, $108 million deal with them, fully guaranteed contract that does keep him under contract until 2029 with a player option that season. Would he still be worth it? Is he the player that they wanted at that point, and is he still that player? Not quite in my opinion, but he's not a terrible option if they didn't have a guy like DeAndre Ayton. In my opinion, that kind of made their need for him go away, made their need for a center and a guy like Myles Turner not really that necessary. You know, maybe next season if they don't re-sign DeAndre Ayton, if they can't bring him back and replace him with a different center, then maybe Myles Turner would be a better option. But at this point, you don't want to make a trade for him, and what it would take to get him through a trade, to simply have him be a backup or then make DeAndre Ayton be your backup, that's not a good plan in my opinion. I mean, to simply match his salary through a trade, you'd be looking at trading Gabe Vincent, Maxi Kleber, and Dalton Knecht to simply make the money work, then likely having to offer a first-round draft pick, their only tradable first-round draft pick, and well, I simply don't think it would be worth it. That's not a good way to use their final tradable first-round draft pick, and if they're going to trade that draft pick, let alone a majority of their expiring contracts with Kleber and Vincent, then you better go after a player that actually addresses one of your final needs, which in my opinion, Myles Turner would not. So after him, and then going down the list here, we have former Laker Kyle Kuzma, a player that actually is a big wing, though he's not quite a 3-and-D wing and not quite a perfect fit for what they have a need for in my opinion, that being a big 3-and-D wing that's a legitimate two-way player. And in my opinion, despite him being able to be a two-way player when locked in and not playing like an idiot, which he can tend to do at times, he's more of a one-way player. A guy that cares more about offense and more about putting up points. A guy that can be a good three-point shooter, despite being a 33.5% career three-point shooter. A guy that can be a good defender, at moments showing it, and even being able to take on some tough matchups for a few possessions here and there. He's simply not very consistent. Never has been, and now at 30 years old, he probably never will be. So in my opinion, then combined with the contract and his salary and what it would take to match it, I don't think it would be worth it. To simply make a trade for him, you'd again have to trade both Maxi Kleber and Gabe Vincent to make the money work, then likely have to attach a second-round draft pick. You know, he doesn't have much trade value, so it wouldn't cost that much, but I still don't think it would be worth it. Wouldn't be worth trading a majority of their expiring assets, even a small draft asset with it. I wouldn't go that route, despite having some good memories of Kyle Kuzma when he was playing well on their team and back in the young Laker days too. But after Myles Turner and Kyle Kuzma, then we have a bit more to talk about in my opinion, as following them I would have interest in making a trade for their 4th highest paid player, that player being Bobby Portis. You know, a guy that's not talked about much and often isn't given much credit for what he does, but once again and for a number of years now, is having a solid year. This season putting up roughly 11 points per game in 21 minutes per game, grabbing 5.5 rebounds per game, shooting a very impressive 47.3% from the 3-point line, yes 47.3% as a stretch 4-5, is a 39% career 3-point shooter, is a guy that in some matchups can play the 4, other matchups can play the 5, is a very versatile big man option. I would have some interest here in Bobby Portis. You know, he might not be a big 3-and-D wing, not even a two-way wing, but he does address one of their needs, and that need happens to be 3-point shooting. And not only that, but unlike both Turner and Kuzma, it wouldn't take both Gabe Vincent and Maxi Kleber to make a trade work for him. And well, if we would trade Maxi Kleber, a guy that's somewhat replicable to Bobby Portis, albeit a bit different, they do play that 4-5 spot, and depending on the matchup can play at either the 4 or the 5. I think that would be a direct upgrade over Maxi Kleber. So if we would trade Kleber, then add in the contract of Dalton Knecht, then maybe a second-round draft pick, at most maybe a future first-round draft pick swap with it, for a trade for Bobby Portis, I think that would actually be worth it. Directly upgrading Maxi Kleber's rebounding ability, his 3-point shooting ability, simply his playability on the court and ability to contribute within the rotation. I think that would be a worthwhile trade to make, would be a direct way to upgrade the rotation, upgrade their front court depth and their versatility at that 4-5 spot, I think it actually might be something worth looking into. So thumbs up for a Bobby Portis trade, and thumbs down for both a Myles Turner and a Kyle Kuzma trade so far. But after those three, then we have Kevin Porter Jr., the 5th highest paid player on their payroll, and a guy that I don't think they would want to trade. You know, at 25 years old and having some untapped potential yet, he probably could be a fit for their rebuild. Not a guy that they would be against trading per se, but not a guy as a Laker fan and kind of imagining it from the Lakers' point of view in their front office. Not a guy that I'd really want to trade for. Playing that shooting guard, kind of point guard spot, more of an on-ball player rather than off-ball player. Not a good defender, a one-way player that does have some prior issues. I wouldn't have interest in Kevin Porter Jr. But after him, we have Brian Rollins, and although I really like him and was a big advocate of trying to sign him this summer, I don't think they'd trade him either. Only 23, having a massive jump this year, even in the conversation for most improved player in my opinion, averaging over 17 points per game, playing great defense, great 3-point shooter, all around a good point guard with actually a lot of untapped potential in my opinion. They won't be trading him either. And well, after that, we simply have a bunch of minimum contracts left, though that's actually not a bad thing for the Milwaukee Bucks, as they probably have the best collection of minimum contracts in the entire NBA. Beginning with Gary Harris, who although is now 31 and is a bit long in the tooth, not quite the player that he once was, I think he's still a decent two-way option. Not a guy that can play 25 to 30 minutes for a team anymore, per game I mean, but a guy that can come off the bench and play 10 to 15 minutes per game, is still a pretty good 3-point shooter this season, albeit in limited playing time, shooting 42.9% from beyond the arc, playing some decent defense while doing it, averaging 1 steal per game in under 13 minutes per game. You know, I think he'd be a decent option if the Lakers are simply kind of done with Dalton Connect and want to flip him for no cost at all, maybe even get a second-round draft pick for him. They could probably swap Dalton Connect for a guy like Gary Harris. Or if they'd want to and bring back Taurean Prince, they could probably do the same thing. If the Bucks would in fact trade Giannis, then I imagine they'd be willing to try to trade both Gary Harris and Taurean Prince, two 31-year-old veterans that would no longer have a fit on their team, and would be pretty cheap to acquire. After that, we have Jericho Sims, who, although is a decent backup center, I would rather have Jackson Hayes over him. Then last but not least, we have AJ Green and Amir Coffey, two great 3-point shooters and quietly one of the best 3-point shooters in the entire NBA with AJ Green. And no, I'm not joking about that. This season, believe it or not, the guy is shooting 50% from beyond the arc on nearly 7 attempts per game. I mean, up until this point, the guy is 74 for 148 from beyond the arc. Absolutely insane. On top of that, he's actually a crafty scoring threat, pretty good finisher around the rim, actually is a decent athletic player, actually is a decent defender to go with it. I'm a big fan of him, and they got him for a very cheap contract, signing him for a 3-year contract worth roughly $10 million per year. I think they got him on a great deal and probably wouldn't be willing to part with him. Though with him being 26 and if they're looking at a very long-term rebuild, maybe they would for the right price. Though it probably would be a pretty hefty price. Maybe something like Dalton Connect and probably a first-round draft pick to get him. No, I'm not joking about that. Again, you might not be familiar with him, but he's actually a really solid player. And if you could get him for cheap for whatever reason, I definitely would have interest, even though it probably isn't very likely. After that though, I just realized I skipped over Gary Trent Jr., a player I think would be a decent option for them. You know, I'd love a trade for him if he were a two-way player, not more so a one-way player, which he definitely is. Simply isn't very committed defensively, but is a great 3-point shooter. If you're trying to upgrade from Dalton Connect and again maybe swap him for Gary Trent, wouldn't be a terrible idea. Would get more consistency offensively, more consistent 3-point shooter, and a guy that simply does that role better than Dalton Connect does. You could make an argument for it. But I think that'll pretty much do it for this one. And if you enjoyed the video, then I'll greatly appreciate it if you drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and hit that notification bell to never miss out when I upload a video. But as always, thank you for watching, and have a great day or night.